In this episode, we're following up on the spin bin that we did last year,
which have held CO2 for millions and millions of years, Kieran. So this is a straightforward operation.
So straightforward. Millions and millions of years, the CO2 has been living there happily. We pulled it out. We said, we just need your friend. You can go back down in there. You just stay down there for millions and millions. Where Angus Taylor, the Minister for Emissions Reductions, was out the front of the Moomba gas project in South Australia, announcing a gift of $15 million for Santos as part of a CCS, carbon capture and storage, development fund.
And that's why it's a very real project. It'll need to be credited under our crediting mechanism, the Emissions Reduction Fund, and we're well advanced, and we expect to have that concluded by the end of this year, and that'll put the project in a position to immediately proceed. So it's very real.
So we just wanted to give you a bit of an update on what has happened since then. So specifically from how Angus went from standing out the front of Moomba, crowing about how this was a real project.
Real emissions reductions.
Real emission. He didn't. At no point did he say real emissions reductions.
I know, he said it's a real project.
Yeah, it's the economics stack up. It's a real project. We just have to change the legislation so it can earn carbon credits, bearing in mind that he said that before the legislation had even been changed. So he went from there to then standing at COP26, the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow in November, with Kevin Gallagher, the CEO of Santos, proudly announcing that, lo and behold, the Moomba project was going to go ahead. So I think it was a co-announcement about the final investment decision.
Yeah, no, I was there and saw it with my own eyes. Day 2 of the conference, all the leaders are there in Australia. First time it has a pavilion in our recent history. Santos, welcome. Here are some carbon credits. So look, we knew this was going to happen, but it's really interesting as to how we got there, and that's what we want to break down for you today.
We've gotten hold of Freedom of Information documents that we've used to put together a report we've just released showing the extent of Santos's influence on the government in creating this carbon capture and storage method. But even worse than that, the influence of the fossil fuel industry in general on Australia's government institutions.
And this is a serious issue, not just in the climate space, but the influence of the fossil fuel industry on an independent regulator that's supposed to be delivering emissions reductions that's in our best interest.
So it's a pretty comprehensive piece of work. It's 50 pages long.
50 pages? When we did a 20-page report, the department didn't even bother to read that. It said, "Cricky, that's way too long. We're going to limit it to just the executive summary in terms of what we read." Well, don't worry, public servants. You don't even have to read the executive summary, do they?
They don't. We've got the delightful Rhys Muldoon narrating the executive summary. So public officials, relax your eyes, open your ears. Here we go.
Come Clean. How the Emissions Reduction Fund came to include carbon capture and storage. Freedom of Information documents show that when designing the ERF CCS method, the Clean Energy Regulator consulted almost exclusively with fossil fuel companies and big emitters, while actively excluding independent researchers. Members of the Emissions Reduction Assurance Committee, ERAC, participated in the CCS method co-design in their industry roles, and then advised government as ERAC members on the method they had helped design.
We strongly recommend that you do read the report. It's an absolute cracker. But the point of today's video is just to highlight a few of the more overtly egregious things that we discovered.
Santos can now earn carbon credits for capturing a small part of their very large gas project.
Yeah, let's just quickly explain how, so it's with CCS, carbon capture and storage. Just quickly explain how that works when gas is extracted, methane's extracted, I should say. It's got a little bit of CO2 in it. Normally that's just let go into the atmosphere, isn't it? Or vented or flared. What Santos is proposing doing is extracting that CO2 or separating it from the methane.
Which they have to do anyway.
And then storing it underground. So that's a tiny fraction of the emissions that result from gas production.
So none of the gas that leaks or, gets lost in transport or in liquefying or anything like that.
No.
It's just a little bit that they strip away, and then some of that will go underground.
Yeah, and then there's all the CO2 from combustion.
Yeah.
So just want to be clear, net result is increased emissions.
Yeah.
That's what CCS is for. It's to justify increased emissions. So anyway, Santos can now get carbon credits for storing that tiny bit of CO2, which they can either sell back to the government through the Emissions Reduction Fund, or they can sell on the voluntary market to businesses who are looking to offset their emissions.
So say Qantas bought it, then they would have a little box there so that when you fly, you tick that box saying, I want to offset my emissions because I want to do right.
Yeah.
They'll go, hey, Santos, we'll take some of those carbon credits.
We'll take some of those sweet, sweet CCS carbon credits.
And that's what you've just bought.
Yeah.
Santos' hot air. And so this is on top of the $15 million that Minister for Emissions Reductions, Angus Taylor, gave them last year.
Now Santos is going to be eligible to earn money through the Emissions Reduction Fund. It's saying it can store, I think it's 1.7 million tonnes of CO2 every year. I mean, it's not going to happen, but for every one of those tonnes that they store, the government will pay them. So could be anywhere from $12 to, like, some contracts for offsets under the government are $17 each. So 17 times 1.7 million.
Per year.
Per year. Yeah, and that's taxpayer money. That's the Emissions Reduction Fund, which is a public fund being paid to Santos to increase its emissions.
Minister Taylor agreed that they'd be able to earn these carbon credits before the rules around this method were even agreed.
Yep, and that there's absolutely no dispute or speculation about that. That's what we showed in that video. He's out there saying it's a real project. It will need to be credited under the ERF. We just got to change some rules. We just got to design a way for Santos to do this. We just have to change a little tiny bit of legislation and then it's sweet.
So how did they design this? That's the big question.
That's the big question.
That's the big question.
Turns out that the government and Santos had actually been working together for a couple of years on this, for this to happen. But not just for Santos to be able to earn carbon credits. Santos was actually involved in designing the entire carbon capture and storage carbon credit method, along with a whole lot of other fossil fuel companies, all of them working together with the government to design a carbon credit method from which they would be able to financially benefit from.
So they weren't just an interested stakeholder. They came up with an idea for how they could make money while still expanding gas, thanks to an emissions reduction fund that's paid to reduce emissions.
We can't say that for sure, but they were certainly very, very heavily involved at all stages of the process. There are a lot of meetings between the head of the Department of Industry with the minister about how this would all work from about March 2020. And bearing in mind that the method was announced, I think, was it late 2021?
Our reports show that this happened in two ways. First, the Clean Energy Regulator, which is supposed to be an independent body that designs and regulates and buys most of these carbon credits, actively invited the fossil fuel industry and Santos to participate in designing this method. As far as we can tell through these Freedom of Information requests, there were no independent scientific or policy think tanks that were invited to this process. We, the Australia Institute, asked early on to be involved in the process, and we were blocked.
And that word design is actually very accurate because the consultation sessions that the Clean Energy Regulator runs are called co-design sessions. There's a lot in that word. They are actually literally co-designing this whole method. But the other thing is this. So there's not only the Clean Energy Regulator who designs all the rules, there's also this other independent committee called the Emissions Reduction Assurance Committee. And they're the ones that actually, after a method has been designed, they advise the minister on if it's legit and if it's going to be resulting in additional abatement.
They do the final checks.
They do the final check, yeah. And they go, yes, Angus Taylor, this is cool, tick. This is a good carbon credit method. Let it go. This independent committee is actually stacked with people who have an interest in this CCS method. I know, surprise. There was a bit of media coverage about this when they were appointed, but not only that, these people actually attended co-design session for the CCS method in dual capacity as their industry representative and representing the ERAC, and then subsequently went on to advise the minister that this method had integrity and that he should approve it.
So wait up, Polly. So these people from industry are appointed to an integrity body that does the final check, while still keeping the same hat on that they had in industry.
Yeah, literally RSVPing, saying, yes, thank you, I'll attend this co-design session from their industry email address.
Yep, and industry being like the CCS lobby.
The CCS
or
lobby.
Or the cement industry.
Cement Industry Federation.
Yep.
Yep. In these FOI documents, there was one declared conflict of interest.
Just one?
Just one. Throughout this entire process, no one declared a conflict or an interest or went on to manage it. So even the person who did declare their interest still fundamentally designed this method that others in their industry were advising the minister on.
Sounds like a good amount of integrity.
Yeah, seems fine.
Yeah,
I guess.
fine. That's fine.
That's fine.
And look, and getting back to the original technology, right? So there's conflicts of interest in how it's designed. It's designed by the actual beneficiaries of this without independent or third parties like us involved, despite wanting to be. And this is all for a technology that doesn't really work.
This is just such a massive scam on every level. Like, this is a scam on top of the scam that is already CCS.
Scam sandwich. Because carbon capture and storage is a colossal failure. I don't know how many times we have to say this, right? Over $4 billion committed by Australian governments, right? There isn't a single successful CCS facility for coal. There's one for gas that's constantly struggled, and I don't think it's still fully operational. And most CCS facilities around the world are used to enhance oil extraction. So they're a net loss. And CCS only ever captures a small portion of the emissions. And it's used to justify big expansions for small captures, which sometimes are used then to drive down CO2 and push up more oil. And that's what we're prioritizing for emissions reductions, using industry reps to run the integrity body and not involving third parties that might have an actual independent interest in this. Seems fine.
That they can earn carbon credits for this and insert themselves in the narrative of climate solutions is absolutely bonkers. And to be clear, there is no one who is not somehow connected to the industry who thinks this is a good idea. Government thinks it's a great idea because they are clearly very, very closely connected to the industry. Everyone who is involved in some way in making a profit from this, giving it 2 thumbs up. Scientists, independent academics, people who don't stand to benefit from this method, or CCS, or gas expansion, everyone thinks it is absolute lunacy.
This touches upon a bigger bugbear we have in the Australians too, which is that net zero by 2050 is a fraud if it's based on false solutions. False solutions that enable more fossil fuel extraction and production. And that's what we're seeing here with this carbon capture and storage crediting mechanism.
So the report focuses on the CER and the ERAC and one particular carbon credit method. But the issues that our report raises are actually incredibly concerning because the government is fast tracking, as it says all the time, like slashing times, fast tracking new method development. There are going to be other governance issues raised by the fact that government is working with industry to develop other carbon credit methods and other activities that can generate carbon credits. They've got a new forthcoming carbon capture utilization storage and method. That's not even storing the CO2 underground. That's just using it for something else and then letting it go.
I read a great article about how gas that's captured could be used in, say, my soda stream. That seems pretty good. CCUS.
That is technically CCUS. Do you want to make a bet right now that becomes a registered project under the ERF?
As in that you can make soda water?
Yeah.
Ooh, I'll take that bet. As Polly says, this is part of a systematic fault in how we develop methods to reduce emissions. And look, the Australian government doesn't have a net zero plan. It has a a pamphlet for how to get down to 85% emissions reductions. The last 15%, it wants to use offsets or credits to do that, right? And so we need to be particularly careful of what we're doing in this space. We're past the days where you see full denial. Now you see delay, and now you see spin. And that's what's at play here now with these carbon crediting mechanisms. And it's not just on carbon capture and storage, it's on a whole variety of methods that all trace back to an independent body that isn't really serving our national needs.
Yeah, it's really not fit for purpose. Emissions Reduction Fund should just be renamed the Emissions Increases Fund. Just a disclaimer, because this is, you know, it's quite a serious report, and what we're discussing here, we're not making any allegations of illegality on anyone who is involved in this report or impropriety. The people involved in the report have maintained that they managed all conflicts of interest and have behaved in integrity all times. What we're asking you to do is read the report.
All 50 pages.
You know what? Read the executive summary, listen to Rhys's executive summary, and just judge for yourself whether this is actually a proper use of public funds and whether people have behaved with integrity in this situation.
Because carbon credits are going to become more important, not less so. And so it's on all of us to make sure that they have integrity, and hopefully this report will add to that. So to summarize it again, you have an independent statutory authority, the Clean Energy Regulator, that allows the fossil fuel interests to design a process that will directly benefit them. And you have an integrity body that's filled with the same industrial lobbyists and representatives that act in those interests and tick and flick this method through.
Yeah, and you've got a minister, don't forget, who before any of this has even happened is standing out the front of the development going, this is going to happen, guys.
And here's $15 million gift to help get this going.
At no point in this process was the fossil fuel industry not involved.
And when others like ourselves wanted to be involved, we were blocked. So you tell us whether you think this has integrity.